The forgotten scientist. There have been many forgotten scientists in history, men and women whose brilliance was ignored, only to be celebrated long after their time. Niklas Adler is a fictional character inspired by real-life scientists who were initially ignored but later changed the world. His story is a blend of historical truth and imaginative storytelling. In a small village nestled between towering mountains and endless fields, there was a boy named Niklas Adler. While other children played outside, Niklas spent his days staring at the sky, watching the stars flicker like tiny lanterns.
Why do they shine?
He would ask.
Because they just do.
His mother replied with a smile. But just because was never an answer for Niklas.
He wanted to know why.
At school, he bombarded his teachers with endless questions.
Why does water turn into ice? Why do birds know where to fly in winter? Why does the apple fall down and not up?
His teachers grew impatient. Niklas, stop asking so many questions. The world is already understood. But Niklas did not stop. He read every book he could find, filled his notebooks with sketches of machines and strange symbols, and dreamed of one day discovering something that would change the world. Little did he know that day would come, but not in the way he imagined. Niklas Adler had grown into a brilliant scientist, though not a famous one. Unlike the well-funded researchers in grand universities, he worked in a small, cluttered laboratory. His fingers were often stained with ink from scribbling calculations late into the night. He had spent years experimenting with electricity, that invisible force that made lightning streak across the sky and powered the lights in homes. But Niklas had a theory that electricity could move through the air itself, without wires. One night, after endless trials, he finally did it. He placed a small metal coil on one side of the table and a light bulb on the other. No wires connected them. Then, with a deep breath, he switched on his device. A faint hum filled the air. And then, the bulb lit up. Niklas gasped. His hands trembled. He had just transmitted electricity through the air.
This will change the world,
He whispered. With great excitement, he gathered his notes and wrote to the Royal Science Academy, requesting an audience. He wanted to show them that the world no longer needed miles of tangled wires. His invention could bring light and power to even the most remote villages, where people lived in darkness. When the day of the demonstration arrived, Niklas entered a grand hall filled with some of the most distinguished scientists of his time. Their sharp eyes studied him as he set up his device. Then, with steady hands, he performed his experiment. The light bulb flickered, then glowed, without a single wire connecting it. Gasps echoed through the room. For a moment, there was silence. Then one scientist stood up and laughed.
This is impossible,
He said.
Electricity cannot travel through the air. It needs wires.
Another scientist scoffed.
Nothing in the laws of physics supports such nonsense.
A third man, a wealthy investor, crossed his arms.
Even if it worked, who would profit from it? People pay for electricity because they need cables to get it to their homes. If energy floated freely, how could it be controlled and sold?
One by one, they dismissed him. Niklas tried to argue.
But you saw it with your own eyes. A senior scientist shook his head. What we saw was a parlor trick, not science. You are wasting our time, Mr. Adler. Good day.
And just like that, the opportunity of a lifetime slipped through his fingers. His discovery, one that could change the world, was ignored. For years, he tried again and again. He wrote letters to universities, sought funding, begged for another chance. But no one listened. Niklas Adler had created a miracle, but the world was not ready to believe in miracles. Now it's time for vocabulary. Distinguished, meaning recognized for excellence, respected. Example: the room was filled with distinguished scholars, all experts in their fields. Dismissed, meaning rejected, ignored, sent away. Example: Niklas's ideas were dismissed by the scientific community. Profound, meaning deep, significant, insightful. Example: Niklas had a profound realization that truth is patient. Unshakable, meaning cannot be changed, strong and firm. Example: Niklas had an unshakable belief in his discovery. Foundation, meaning the base or groundwork of something. Example: his research became the foundation of modern wireless technology. Ahead of his time, meaning having ideas that are too advanced for the current era. Example: Niklas was ahead of his time, discovering things people were not ready to accept. Truth will always shine, meaning no matter how much it is ignored, the truth will eventually be recognized. Example: even though people dismissed his ideas, truth will always shine. Against all odds, meaning succeeding despite great difficulties. Example: Niklas proved his theory against all odds. The world wasn't ready, meaning when an idea is too advanced for people to accept at the time. Example: Niklas's discovery was ignored because the world wasn't ready. Time to continue our story. Decades passed. Niklas, once a young and passionate scientist, had grown old. His hair had turned gray, his hands had grown frail, and his once bright eyes had lost their youthful fire. His small home was filled with dusty notebooks, forgotten inventions, and half-finished experiments. His discovery, his life's work, lay buried under time and rejection. One day, as he sat near his window, watching the world rush by without him, there was a knock at his door. A young man in his 20s, dressed in a crisp suit, stood outside. He carried a stack of papers and had an eager look in his eyes. "Sir," the young man said, almost breathless.
Are you Niklas Adler?
Niklas nodded slowly.
I was once.
He said, his voice weak but curious. The young man's face lit up. "I've been searching for you for years. I found your old research. It's brilliant. The world is finally ready for it." Niklas's heart skipped a beat.
What do you mean?
The young man held up the papers. They were filled with complex equations, ones Niklas had written long ago. Wireless transmission of energy.
It's real. Scientists and companies are working on it now. Your work was ahead of its time, but now we have the technology to prove it.
Niklas stared at the papers, his hands trembling. After all these years, after being laughed at, rejected, forgotten, the world was finally listening. Tears welled in his tired eyes. He had spent his whole life believing that truth does not disappear just because people refuse to see it. And now, after so long, the truth had risen, like the sun after the longest night. Years after Niklas's passing, history corrected itself. Books were rewritten, museums displayed his inventions, and his name was spoken with the same reverence as the great scientists of the past. Today, every time we use wireless internet, remote controls, satellite signals, or contactless charging, we unknowingly thank a man who once worked alone in a dimly lit room, ignored by the world, yet driven by the unshakable belief that the truth would one day shine like the stars he loved as a child. History has seen many forgotten scientists, men and women whose brilliance was ignored, only to be celebrated long after their time. If there is one lesson to learn from Niklas Adler's story, it is this. Never stop questioning. Never stop believing in your ideas. Because even if the world isn't ready today, one day, the truth will shine. Hope you like my story. Please subscribe and like my videos and do comment and tell me how do you find my stories and also share it with your family and friends for knowledge. Thanks for watching.